Minutes Now, and the national campaign manager, Donald J. Trump for President campaign, Corey Lewandowski. Hey, Corey, great to have you back.
Hey, thanks for having me on this morning. Good morning.
Always a pleasure, and great to see you guys out in L.A. at the Reagan Library. Just as an aside, I was right once again because I thought you won the debate immediately, and I said that, tweeted out, and said that the following day, and then all the polls came out showing that. So I thought it was a pretty solid performance, especially, Corey, in the fact that I thought Trump was gang-tackled basically for the first hour and a half. What say you?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think many people would concede the fact that Mr. Trump was the focal point of that debate because he is the clear front runner in this race for the GOP nomination for president. Maybe it was 8-on-1, maybe it was 9-on-1, maybe it was 10-on-1. 40+% of the questions either had his name in it or were directly related to him and statements that he has made. And I think he clearly did an excellent job of not only holding his own, but relating his positions to the American public of what he wants to do to make America great again. I think it was a very difficult atmosphere, a difficult environment. And if you look at the post-polls, whether it's Drudge or Time Magazine or Newsmax or any of those others, time and time again they show that he was the winner of that debate, so we're very pleased with that performance.
Yeah, look, I also thought 3 hours was way too long. Okay, Scott Walker out, governor of Wisconsin, coming in, a lot of fanfare, raised a lot of money, had a big organization in Iowa and some of the southern states, Virginia being one of them. And what happens, he just didn't catch fire for whatever reason. But I have to say, Corey, I was taken aback by his withdrawal comments on Monday. I don't think I've ever seen a candidate drop that far so fast and then blame someone else and then say, well, I'm dropping out so that we can beat this other guy. What did you make of that?
Well, so, here's the thing. Scott Walker was brought to prominence through a speech he made in January in Iowa. Many people said he was going to be the nominee by that speech, that he was someone who had the ability to bridge the gap between Tea Party and the establishment. He was ultimately he was in the race for 69 days. Their campaign grew to 90 people. It was not well managed, unfortunately. He went through all of his campaign money, but more importantly, he doesn't have a message that the American people wanted was the disappointing part. You've got all of these political insiders, these politicians who have made a career of being in elective office with, in some cases, very few results to show for that time in elective office. And the American people don't want that. Washington is broken. Many states are broken. And it is time, if you look at what the polling data indicates and what the American people want, to put someone in Washington who will actually change the culture, that is not beholden to special interests, that will not do what they're told by their donors, that is not going to do what is best for the 1%, and that doesn't need to be told what to do by other people. And that's why, if you look at what is going on in the country right now, those people who have that vast, quote-unquote, political experience, who have been elected officials their whole lives, are, trailing badly in most of the public opinion polls.
Well, I think you nailed it, and I thought the Scott Walker campaign had a lot of potential when it started. I mean, he did a good job in Wisconsin in a lot of areas, no question. Fought a lot of battles there, but, he just never took off. And, I mean, there was a couple instances where he didn't have a straight answer on several things, and, there's a lot of candidates, so you have to step up. But I don't think I've ever seen a candidate then get out and blame someone else, and I almost got the feeling when it was over that I think if he could do that over again, he might have rethought how that came over. I want to get to...
Well, let me just say this. As you remember, Mr. Trump had said, hey, Scott Walker's doing really well in Iowa. Many people believed he was the person to beat in Iowa for a significant portion of the 69 days he was in the race. And then all of a sudden, he allowed his staff to go and attack Mr. Trump, specifically one of his fundraisers who called Trump a dum-dum. And then when that happened, Mr. Trump counterpunched.
Right.
And when you counterpunch with Donald Trump, right, you start to bring forward all of the failures of the state of Wisconsin, who was supposed to have a $2.2 billion surplus, ends up with a $1 billion deficit. And you start looking specifically at who's the CEO of that state at the time. And that was under Scott Walker's regime, and it's unfortunate. But, if he would have run the campaign, which had not attacked Donald Trump, it's very possible he'd still be in the race today.
Absolutely, no doubt about it. I want to get to the Syrian migrant refugee crisis, Corey, and Mr. Trump's position on this. It started with Obama asking that we look at taking 10,000 in. Now it's gone in a week to 185,000. No one knows what the number will be. We all expect it's going to be over 200,000. What is Mr. Trump's position on this?
Well, this is very simple. The bottom line is we should take in zero. That's what we should take in. And the United States, to be clear, has a process, for bringing refugees into the country. And an individual must qualify as a refugee to begin that process, is how it works. Individuals caught in a civil war do not necessarily qualify as refugees. And if things are so dire now, why didn't the administration take action in 2011 and 12 and 13 and all the years of the tenure of the Secretary Clinton to solve the problem? And so why is it such a question now? Why is Darfur any less significant? The bottom line is this is something where the United States should not be bringing in refugees. If Mr. Trump were the President of the United States, we would not be bringing refugees into the country under this criteria. And what is clearly needed is a new leader in the White House, one who will be decisive and courageous in leading from the front instead of the rear, as this president has done.
Don't you think that we need to look at the problems in America before we take in another upwards of 200,000 people?
That's exactly right. It is time, and Mr. Trump has said this time and time again, to put Americans first. Well, what I understand our position in the global economy and how important the United States is in world public affairs, it is time to look at the people who are in our country first who are struggling, the middle class, the bottom class of people who can't survive, and give them opportunities. And this is exactly what the issue is when it comes to not just bringing in refugees, but illegal immigrants. It is time to build a wall. It is time to make sure our borders are secure. It is time to make sure that the people who are at the lowest economic status in our country, their jobs are not being taken away from illegal immigrants who are coming to this country illegally. And once we can do that, once we take care of our own people and give them jobs, don't forget, we've got 90 million people who aren't even in the workforce anymore. They've just given up working because they can't find a job, and the government says, well, they don't count anymore because they've given up. Why don't we let those people, give them the opportunity to do the jobs, give them the opportunity to have a leg up, give them the opportunity to make their lives better before we worry about the people in other parts of the world who aren't U.S. citizens to begin with?
Absolutely. I mean, that makes a lot of sense to me. Let's get to Carly Fiorina. She had a stellar performance at the debate, no doubt. Now she's risen to second or third, depending on the poll that you look at. But I want to highlight something that she said a while back. After laying off upwards of 30,000 employees at HP, Fiorina said, and I quote, "There is no job that is America's God-given right anymore. We have to compete for jobs." How does Mr. Trump feel about that statement?
Well, look, I think everybody has to compete for their jobs, and I think that's how the free market works. But what you need to look at and what your listeners need to be reminded of is that, there are many public documents out here now that talk about Carly Fiorina's reign as the CEO of Hewlett-Packard, and before that Compaq, and before that senior executive at Lucent Technologies. And what you see is a clear pattern of her failed leadership in each of those positions. When she was the CEO of Hewlett-Packard, and they ultimately fired her and walked her out of the building, the board of directors had 0 votes that were in favor of actually keeping her in her job. It was a unanimous decision to fire her because her job, she did so poorly for that company. She fired 30,000 individuals from there. Revenues were down 55%. At the same time, where they say, well, there was a bubble in the market, but what that bubble really was the S&P was down 7%. Her company was down 55%. She fired 30,000 people, and we saw last Wednesday that company is still recovering. They laid off another 30,000 people. We were in New Hampshire last Thursday night, and we had a woman there who said, she had her money in the company because she was an employee for 30-plus years. Carly came in. Her stocks went through the floor. She ended up losing her job, getting fired, and has still not recovered from her tenure as a CEO. And I think what this country needs to be very, very cautious of is putting someone in place who speaks well, is articulate, but has no ability to actually create jobs, because that's what our country needs, is a job creator.
Corey, I want to get to the Trans-Pacific Partnership Act. Now we're finding out that there is things in the agreement that would allow foreign companies to bring in foreign workers without any congressional approval on it. If Mr. Trump became president, is this TPP something that he would be able to either change or scrap? How does he stand on it?
Well, Well, you have to do this. See, this is the problem. We have currently an administration which does not know how to negotiate. The Trans-Pacific Partnership, the TPP, it's a secretive, multinational trade agreement that threatens to extend restrictive intellectual property laws across the globe and rewrite international rules on its enforcement. And here's the problem. We have administrative officials who don't know how to negotiate. They continuously negotiate in positions from behind, and we see this with the Iran deal, where we know we're getting our lunch eaten. We see this with our trade deals with China and Mexico, and this is another example. You know, if our country wants to be rich again and our country wants to be great again, we need to have a chief executive and leadership who actually understand what it's like for real negotiations, to put our country's best interests first. And that's what Donald Trump would do if he were elected president.
Corey, last week, your campaign put out for Mr. Trump a pretty detailed firearms position going forward. Didn't get a lot of attention in the media. What are the highlights of it?
Well, it's basically simple, right? I mean, it's about giving people who are law-abiding citizens the right to carry a firearm, you know, a national right to carry a firearm, you know, a permit that should be valid in all 50 states. You know, a driver's license works in every state, so it's common sense that a concealed and carry permit should work in every state. If we can do it for driving, which is a privilege and not a right, then surely we should be able to do this for a concealed and carry permit, which is a right and not a privilege. And that's the big differentiator here. You know, there are a lot of people who say, well, I can drive in New York and I can drive in Connecticut, but the Constitution guarantees us the right to keep and bear arms. And if you live in New York, a city which has its own fair share of crime, or Chicago, or some of the other large metropolitan areas, it's almost impossible as a law-abiding citizen to get a license to carry a concealed weapon. But the criminals don't have to follow those rules. And so his plan under the Second Amendment would be a universal right to carry card. The other big component is allowing military bases and recruiting centers to carry those individuals who are trained, our military personnel, trained to carry their weapons on the base. We rely on these individuals every day when they're overseas fighting to protect our national interests, and we train them. They're the best trained military in the world. They know how to use their weapons, and then they come back to the U.S. on soil and say, you know what, you can't carry your weapon on a military base or in a recruiting center. And what we see is something like happens in Chattanooga, Tennessee, where someone walks in and shoots our military personnel and they can't defend themselves. And we are relying on individuals, in some cases, who are not military personnel, to stand outside of these recruiting centers with their own weapons so that we can protect our own military domestically. Right. There's something fundamentally wrong with that, so it's time to change that and give those people the opportunity to protect themselves.
Now, we understand that within a week you'll have a new tax policy coming out in detail. Can you share some of that with us now?
Yeah, I mean, you know, the high-level parts of the tax plan are, to oversimplify it, is people will pay less money in taxes under the Trump plan. That's what it's going to come down to. If you're a hedge fund guy and what he likes to call a paper pusher, you're going to pay more because it's not fair. You know, if you're making $300 or $400 million a year and you're paying, you know, almost peanuts on your taxes, it's not right. What we need to do is to stimulate the economy. The best way to do that is to cut taxes on the middle class, on those who are earning lower wages than those millionaires and billionaires on Wall Street. It's time to keep the Wall Street guys accountable. And Jeb Bush, who was bought and sold and paid for by the Wall Street executives, and Hillary Clinton, who are, you know, these guys are just funneling hundreds of millions of dollars into these campaigns. They don't want a Trump administration because we're not taking any of their money. Right. We don't want any of their money. And so we will put out a plan which says if you are a Wall Street executive and your carried interest is something that you have taken advantage of for a long time, that comes to an end in the Trump administration. And the other thing that we want to talk about is making sure that we get some of that money back, which is currently parked overseas. Bring that money back into the U.S. and let that money come to work here, because we are penalizing companies by saying, you keep your money overseas, don't bring it back here, else you have to pay a massive tax. It's time to have our economy be stimulated again, and the best way to do that, we know, is to make our country much more competitive in the global marketplace with a lower tax rate.
Absolutely, without a doubt. We look forward to that coming out. Corey Lewandowski, campaign manager, Donald Trump for president campaign. The establishment has criticized your campaign to me and said, look, it's all smoke and mirrors. At the end of the day, they don't have state organizations in place in the early states that is going to propel them to victory? How do you answer that?
Well, look, I think if you look at what the early states are, if you look at Iowa, if you look at New Hampshire, if you look at South Carolina, these are states where we've had people on the ground since January of this year, 9 months. We were in Iowa both last Saturday and the Saturday prior to that. We were in New Hampshire on Thursday, where Mr. Trump had 3,000 people come out and see him. We continue to build our network there, our team there. We'll announce some new hires today in some of the SEC primary states. So our team continues to grow, but we grow strategically. And, I love to be the team that is, underestimated. And that's what they have done with this campaign every time. First they said Trump wouldn't run. Then they said he wouldn't file his paperwork. Then they said he wouldn't disclose his finances. And then they said even if he ran, he wouldn't be a factor in this race. And for the last 10 weeks, Donald Trump has been the leader, the clear and unequivocal leader for the race for the Republican nomination. And they keep saying that his balloon is going to come down. There is no signs of that happening. As a matter of fact, John Zogby had a poll out yesterday, very well respected, shows Mr. Trump is now at 33% in the field. Ben Carson in second place at 13%. There's a 20-point delta there. We are very pleased with the work that we're doing on the ground in those early primary states, and much more than just those early primary states. We've got a state director in Nevada who's working. So, we're excited about where we are in this race. We'll take nothing for granted, but we are truly building a massive ground operation that most of the political pundits in Washington, D.C., because they've never been to Iowa or New Hampshire or Nevada, don't have the ability to see it.
Well, I'm going to get out to Iowa before the end of October without a doubt, and I'm going to be able to check that out and tell everybody exactly what's going on out there. But look, at the end of the day, I predicted this back in May. I'm going to stay with it. Donald Trump, I predict, is going to be the nominee of the Republican Party in 2016.